Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush, and with me, as always, is Phil McKenzie. Phil, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Such a privilege to be here.
Yeah. It is. Very glad to have you. What are we doing this week? Well, let's see. Coming up next weekend, we have what actually looks on paper to be an okay card. You know, certainly a lot better than this last weekend's card was on paper. Fortunately, as it played out on Saturday Live, none of the fighters were actually on paper. They decided, all of them, to physically step into the octagon, and in that physical realm, a weak lineup of fights on the card actually turned out to be a very, very fun night of actual real fights. So we have a lot of stuff to get to in recap. I'm not sure, honestly, how much of it we'll be able to get to, because there really were so many great fights and results last weekend. So we may end up cutting a little bonus episode for you guys this week if we try to get to more than we can actually fit into this main ep. But I just want you to know that that's coming at the end of the show. Before we do any of that, the Korean Zombie versus Brian Ortega is our upcoming main event. Very, very interesting fight there. A couple more from that card that we want to touch on as well. I think Caitlin Chukagian versus Jessica Andrade, and Jimmy Crute versus, our new lord, Modestas Bukauskas. And if you don't understand why he is our new lord, all I need you to do is type that name into Google, click on the Tapology page for Modestas Bukauskas, and then when you wake up 5 years later from just staring at the photos, staring into his hollowed out eyes, which are both soulless yet contain the entirety of the universe, we won't need to explain to you. You will already be fully inducted into the cult. So we're looking forward to getting to all of that. Before we do any of that, though, Phil, can we just mention really quick the good work that Kevin Holland has done? The good work that Kevin Holland has done for this sport and this organization that is the UFC.
I mean, clearly the most influential fighter on roster right now.
Yeah, best coach in the sport. I mean, fuck Fortis MMA. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Friendship ended with...
Get out of here, Eugene Behrman.
That's right. Friendship ended with Fortis. ATT is dog shit. We knew it all along. Rafael Cordero, what a joke. None of these men could create a result as inspiring as Kevin Holland did, indirectly through the hands, or rather the feet, of Joaquin Buckley last weekend. Have you ever seen anything like that? Because, I mean, I've seen Taekwondo knockouts that are along those lines. You know, that's actually like, it's not the most uncommon idea. That sort of like touch and jump to the jumping spinning back kick in TKD. But in MMA?
Oh, that was one of the most incredible knockouts I have ever seen in this sport, or indeed in any combat sport.
Yeah. Like, my immediate reaction was genuine, utter disbelief. It's like, that didn't just happen. That's not I know that's a concept that can happen, but I didn't just see it work, did I? Amazing. I think we'll get more into talking about it and maybe some actual technical details of it, but just let it be known that later in the show we will be giving all of the credit for that, what may be the greatest knockout in UFC history, aesthetically speaking anyway. We'll be giving all the credit to the man who really deserves it, Kevin Holland. Next weekend's card, Phil. Korean Zombie. Brian Ortega. Can I just go ahead and I'm just going to lay the lead out bare for our listeners and tell them what you said before we started recording, which this is the entirety of how we pick fights, by the way. This is what's going on in both of our heads. I think you said something along the lines of, I don't really know what's going to happen, but we're both going to pick Zombie because neither of us thinks Brian Ortega is very good. I don't fully agree with that, Phil, but I want to know why you said it.
Because Brian Ortega has gotten better at, well, A, Brian Ortega has not fought for a long time.
That is
and B,
pressing.
Brian Ortega is the classic example of a fighter who has improved the things he was good at, and like the things he was bad at just haven't improved at all. I would, because I think he really was an all-offense fighter when he first came to the UFC, even if it was, mostly just scrambles and submissions.
Yeah.
And what he's largely just learned, other than that, is to be enough of a dynamic force on the feet to force people into exchanging with him. What he hasn't gotten any better at is defense.
Do you think that's entirely fair? I mean, I don't expect him to catch up to other great strikers defensively right away, but he's certainly, I mean, even in that Max Holloway fight, which is not no one would use that as an example of why defense is good, because he ate about 1 billion punches. But even in that, I mean, there were certainly more attempts at defense than we would have seen in a previous Brian Ortega fight, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's fair. And it is a common sort of criticism of tall fighters in MMA from us specifically, that they tend to rely on their reach to insulate them.
Yeah.
I think he does do that. And I think he does that by basically making it too dangerous to go into his area of offense. He's just got a long, powerful jab. He hits to the body. Mm-hmm. He's got a nice step knee. He's basically similar to, in weird ways, similar to a much more powerful James Vick.
Yeah, I can see that.
So I think this worked for him against Frankie Edgar, who is a much, much, much smaller person, who doesn't really have much punching power and whose entire game plan is predicated on level change mix-ups. I think it all worked very nicely with how Ortega fights. I think worked for him against Renato Moicano, because he could just eventually, if he just waded through Moicano until Moicano couldn't take anymore.
Yeah.
Didn't work that great against Cub Swanson.
No, nor that great against Clay Guida. Certainly not that great against Max Holloway.
I'm willing to give the Clay Guida one a pass. I think he genuinely made a lot of improvements after that.
I agree. Yeah, I mean,
fight.
I kind of want to, and not, this isn't just to make you look foolish, although that is obviously part of my motivation. But I'm gonna defend Ortega and say I think he's been developing, in a direction that makes a lot of sense. You can certainly critique him for leaning into the things he's good at, but that's kind of what we frequently encourage fighters to do, for their career-long progression, right? Is don't try to become an all-rounder. Lean into your specialties, and build a game around the things that naturally seem to make you feel comfortable and confident, because those things in and of themselves are so important in fighting. I think Ortega has developed some defense. I don't think it's great. And obviously Max Holloway just had too much variety and granularity for this to work. But I think it's actually good for Ortega that he has developed not only defense, but the understanding that he shouldn't be relying on his defense for long. Whether or not it's as good as it should be yet or not, Ortega is a very, very aggressive counterpuncher. And I think that also works really well for his style, for his stature. Like you said, a little James Vickish. Let's be real, his win over Frankie Edgar, basically the exact same win that Korean Zombie got over Frankie Edgar. Very similar dynamics, just aggressive counterpunching and lifting this little short dude's head off his neck with the uppercuts. Key element of both of those fights. And yeah, I think the fact that Ortega recognizing that maybe he's not a great defensive fighter, but that his defense will inform, the rest of his game, that it should be treated as a thing that automatically leads to more offense. I think that's a smart, efficient development as well. So I'm not really ready to critique the direction Ortega was headed in. The thing that really worries me here is just the layoff. Cause that's a total mystery to me what Brian Ortega looks like. On the one hand, it's probably been more than enough time to recover from whatever the most immediate effects of that Max Holloway loss were. Even the mental effects of confidence loss and everything. It's been 2 years. So that's some time to emotionally process what happened and to physically recover. He could be one of many guys who's been working really hard throughout quarantine and everything and has just been getting better even before then, but I don't know. But this is just defending Ortega. I like the direction in which his game has developed thus far. I think it makes perfect sense for him.
So you know what?
Yeah?
You are right. I'm wrong.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you so very much.
Cause I've been running through that Holloway fight a bit more. It is actually, I think you're right about his defense, because the amount that he developed, I think, between, as you said, like, he's still not a great defensive fighter, but he has developed a lot.
Yeah.
Between that and the Moicano fight. I mean, admittedly, and in retrospect, Moicano fight looks like a much smarter game plan. It even did at the time. Because at the time, it just looked like an aggressive fighter who just refused to go away.
Yeah.
Hulking a less physical fighter out of the cage. He just came forward and he punched him until Moicano couldn't take any more. And he absorbed punishment and all that other kind of stuff.
And had to shoot, had to go into Ortega's A game.
Yeah. Then you see what a much more, an inarguably more technical boxer.
Yeah.
Then go on to do against Moicano, namely Calvin Kattar, and who would just get annihilated. The fact that Ortega was constantly coming forward, made a lot more sense.
Yeah, I think very wise.
In retrospect, I'm not sure if it was deliberate or instinctive, but it does look like, it was the best possible game plan for his skill set.
Yeah, coming in with always force your fight no matter what, because the moment you give this guy his range. I mean, yeah, looking at what happened in the Max Holloway fight, that's one where Ortega couldn't help but let Max Holloway have his range, and look what happened. I just think it's pretty easy to be like holding this guy's defense to the standard of, did it work well against Max Holloway? Did it work well against somebody whose entire game is giving you little low power things to fuck up your defense and then build off of that like an avalanche? Is maybe not. I mean,
it was less that and more stuff from his more the Swanson and Moicano fights.
Yeah.
I think the Holloway fight is genuinely pretty good for him. And
I agree,
because he tries to pick when to engage and disengage. He's got a number of he tries to move his head more. He even he does it a few times successfully. He tries to pick off shots with his elbows quite a lot. I mean, he's always done that a bit, but he uses it in conjunction with his feet a lot more.
Yeah, it just wasn't good enough, but it was certainly better.
Yeah.
So yeah, okay. Well, thank you, Phil. I'm glad we could agree on that. Now, do we still think Korean Zombie? Yeah. Okay, tell me why.
He's a really good counterpuncher.
Yep. He hits very, very hard, which is also a really good thing to have in your back pocket when you're a counterpuncher.
Yeah. He's just a really committal counterpuncher. When he goes on the offense, he throws punches in combinations, as we saw against Yair Rodriguez. He chases people down with punching combinations. And whilst we're setting the record straight, I do still see people saying that Zombie's loss against Rodriguez was somehow like bad decision. Like he had the fight in the bag. Why was he?
Oh
rushing
yeah,
in?
yeah. No, I think it's a natural compulsion to think that way because like you get this fatalistic view. You're like, oh, if only he had just taken the last 15 seconds off. But you know, he was in command of the fight, and that's every other time what you tell fighters to do is to maintain control of the fight, continue pushing for the finish right to the end.
And also, you know, he was up against someone who isn't a great counterpuncher,
Yeah.
who is an incredible dynamite kicker, where he was best served to crush the distance. Like there was no reason to assume he was going to pull one of the weirdest counter KOs out in MMA history out of his ass.
It had literally been working for a better part of 4 rounds already. So no, I'm not going to critique him for making a mistake there.
So on offense, I think he can probably.
Just made me think of it. Did you see Marcus Perez's attempt to replicate the Yair Rodriguez elbow last weekend?
Yes.
Oh, very, very sad. It resulted in one of the silliest looking KOs I've ever seen.
Yeah, I was watching this with other people actually at the time.
Yeah.
And I was like, this guy's actually kind of entertaining because he's like Johnny Walker, but without any of the speed and power. So he's just really bad.
Mm-hmm.
He thinks he's really good, and then that happens.
Yep. Proof is in the pudding right there. Okay. Anyway, sorry for the distraction. Just the idea of every other time Rodriguez tries that elbow and it doesn't work. Just knowing that that's what it would have looked like. So anyway, go on.
We've got, so yeah, basically I think, a lot of Ortega's offense does start with the jab, or at least when he's working well.
Mm-hmm.
Zombie has made sort of a career of cross countering and in general countering jabs.
Mm-hmm.
Again, Ortega's defense breaks down when he's on the back foot.
Yep.
Zombie, you know, comes forward behind combinations of punches. They're both very, very hard punches. I would probably say Zombie hits a bit harder.
I think so.
That's my basic read.
Yeah, I can't disagree with any of that. I think it's fair to say Korean Zombie's a bit harder, or maybe just a bit more accurate with better timing. I mean, he has been timing counterpunches for much longer than Brian Ortega, and that may in itself be the difference. Cause they're both guys with like sort of rangy frames and big hands, and they both do seem to carry plenty of power. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Ortega's, jab. Cause I can see that going 2 ways, right? If it's developed a lot, I mean, it was already a pretty effective weapon for him. If it's developed a lot, if he has been, you know, doing lots of sparring with boxers and sharpening and honing that aspect of his game, then that's the weapon that messes up counterpunchers. It's how Holloway was able to mess him up. It's also the reason I think that Korean Zombie has developed such a penchant for jab counters, because way better to have a series of counters for the jab than to let the opponent establish the jab and then try to counter whatever might be coming after it. The jab is so effective because it's hard to counter, which really encourages you to invest in learning how to counter it. So yeah, I could see that going either way. I could see that turning Korean Zombie's counterpunching against him. And if Ortega can get control of the initiative of this fight with that jab, then I actually kind of have a hard time telling you how it's going to look. If, however, he is able to counter that jab relatively early into the fight and prevent any real momentum being picked up, then to me, it becomes relatively easy to pick Korean Zombie. So I think that weapon right there, I'm going to be keeping a very close eye on how it is received and responded to in the first round. Otherwise, do you think there's any potential, any outside chance for this to be a little more boring than expected? Because both of these guys like to counter and because Ortega has had a layoff, and I don't know. I think both of them are. I think
it does. I think it does require Ortega being someone. He's going to have to be someone very different to the person that we've seen so far.
Sure.
Because the guy that we saw for was a real, like, go out on a shield kind of guy. But, you can never tell. I mean, I would have bet money that Paulo Costa was simply too stupid to be scared.
Yeah, right.
He was clearly shook in his fight.
Who can understand the mind of a fighter?
Yeah. But but also I think Ortega could look worse and more timid. Like you said, he could look better.
Yeah.
If he can come out and run a game where he can, like, think the jab, if he can add, like, more low kicks into his game, I think that would probably help against Korean Zombie.
Yeah. I think part of the reason it was so easy to kind of overlook is that it really was a rapid progression for Brian Ortega of his game starting to add layers and evolve. And actually, on that note, I want to say I think Korean Zombie, like, I don't hear enough people talking about this. I guess quietly, this man has gotten way, way better at counterpunching and striking mechanics in general over the last 2 or 3 years. Like, he's like a legitimately technically sound combination puncher. Transfers his weight well. His punches are nice and tightly thrown. Footwork is a more integral part of his counterpunching than ever before. Step back left hook, pivoting while punching, finding angles, all of that combined with the sort of head movement. Like, there's a reason that Moicano KO is so pretty and that Korean Zombie was delivering devastating KOs early in his career, but nothing that aesthetically perfect.
I think the counter on Hominick, I think, was the first time we saw what he could do, but it was in a specific singular instance.
Yeah. Like, just the general form of his boxing has greatly, greatly improved.
I mean, that's another, like, it's a really interesting point, actually, because obviously, looking at it from that perspective, the two of them have very similar career progression and arc, right?
Yeah.
So that they were just bangers who relied on their chin.
Yep.
Pretty much in the early going. And then they've just cleaned it up with a lot more, like, focus on fundamentals, on the jab for Ortega, and on better mechanics and positioning for Zombie. And yeah, I mean, it might again, from that perspective, it might be one of those ones where, like, the OG has a significant advantage because he's like, oh yeah, you're at step 5. This progression, I'm at step 7. I remember what it was like back then.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what I'm thinking. I mean, I don't know. It's tough because neither of these guys, if Korean Zombie, if you were to categorize him strictly as a counterpuncher, he's a Marquesian counterpuncher. You know what I mean? He's very, very willing to dust it up, and to get into a scrap. He's not that patient. Ortega, I think, even less so. Definitely has similar counterpunching instincts and is probably progressing in a similar direction. Very similar, like you said. But a little less disciplined, and maybe that's what makes the difference here. And I'm gonna make that basically the basis of my pick for Korean Zombie. I do think it kind of comes down to an OG having the edge pick. But I am so interested to see how Brian Ortega looks as he comes back. I don't entirely like Ortega as a person. He kind of rubs me the wrong way, but he is absolutely a must-watch fighter. And I just don't want it to be overlooked that he was rapidly progressing up to the point of that loss to Max Holloway. And I think there's still could very well be a lot of potential to see him do a lot more in the next few years. So I'm excited, man. I'm looking forward to this one.
It's another one of those fights like Mariah Sternhagen last week where we were just like, this. Yeah. Find it very difficult to imagine this being boring.
Mm-hmm.
Either of these guys. And, I mean, it's challenging to even think what it would look like if Ortega developed that jab, because I think, Sriram was mentioning this on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
Every time someone like that has come up against Zombie, he's instantly melted them.
It's true.
Namely Hominick and Moicano.
And I think...
Oh yeah, how does he deal with a jab?
Yeah.
Like, toying with his defenses, and he just jumps on the first opportunity he gets and wipes them the fuck out.
Yeah.
Which is, again, sort of positive, but then cannot bank on him wiping out Ortega with one punch.
Yeah.
Mark Hominick, sure, yes.
It could, it certainly could happen.
Yes.
It certainly could happen, but as far as we've seen so far, Ortega is insanely durable. And like that's the mystery of this matchup for me, why I'm just not that confident, because Korean Zombie it's like the smart guy's version of the heavyweight fight where we don't learn anything, like he keeps going in there and doing, he refuses to let us learn anything in the most artistically perfect way possible. It's a beautiful counter to the jab, but I still need to see someone who can handle those counters, continue to feed him jabs, and disrupt his timing. I need to see the layers beyond that first jab counter, because again, the reason Korean Zombie has gotten so good at countering the jab is because it's a nightmare to deal with a persistent jab that you haven't effectively taken away as a counterpuncher. It is the hardest punch to counter, especially when you let it get established and allow the other person to start adjusting it and playing with it. So yeah, I don't know.
I think the main thing there is that be able to have a jab that you can adjust and play off. You need the defense to back it up to some extent. And I think that's what Ortega's going to have to show. Because if he can, throw a jab without costing him either a big counterpunch or just being chased down on the back foot and being combination punch. I think the other interesting thing I just want to say before we wrap up is that because Zombie still is the counterpuncher, I think it's going to be sort of up to Ortega to dictate the pace of this fight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
Korean Zombie is definitely...
He's going to be throwing as much as he not quite, but sort of as much as he wants to. That was one of the things I think made the Rodriguez fight more competitive, is that Zombie didn't give Rodriguez space because he was still up and with him the whole time. He wasn't, he was always maintaining the same distance, waiting for Rodriguez to make an error he could capitalize on. He didn't force a high strike rate. He didn't just drag Rodriguez into a high-paced boxing match.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be down to Ortega to say, we're going to be throwing this many strikes per minute. Mm-hmm. It's going to come within, someone pushes, if Ortega wants to push the pace, he can.
Yeah.
If he wants to be more measured and try and find a way to probe around Zombie's counterpunching, he can do that too. I think the pace will be primarily dictated by Ortega.
Which, like the battle of the jab we already discussed, it could go either way. Mm-hmm. Maybe him pushing a high pace. It all just depends on the degree, how far he has continued to develop that boxing game of his. But I have reasonably high hopes. I'm willing to be surprised because, I do think it was progressing super quickly last time we saw it.
You've sold me, I think.
All right. It's gonna be a hell of a fight. This is again, just like last weekend's main event. It can't be boring. It's immensely fascinating, and it has huge implications for this division. So it really ticks all the boxes. Very much looking forward to that one. And what better way to follow it up than with our next segment? We're going to talk about, you ready, Phil? I'm going to do that great original joke I always do. Cyril Gane versus Ante Delija.
I have those heavyweights.
Yep, gotta have that heavyweight co-main event. Hey, it worked out last weekend, Phil. I guess that's us told, huh? Caitlin Chukagian, Jessica Andrade up at flyweight after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are continuing down the lineup here of next weekend's upcoming card, which is, of course, UFC Ortega versus TKZ. Very difficult to search Korean zombie fights on Fight Pass, by the way, because it's kind of a crapshoot whether they enter him as Korean zombie or as Chan Sung Jung. I think you gotta pick one if you're gonna go full nickname route and stick with it, or just probably a good idea, have both search terms work for all the fights in your database. Just a thought.
Crazy talk,
Yeah.
Connor.
Maybe just don't have it be a direct reference to this. You know what else would be great? If I search for like a Jung versus Frankie Edgar, and because that's the main event, every other fight from that card doesn't show up before the one fight I'm actually looking for. Just another small tweak.
Just asking for the world here, Reba.
I didn't intend to get really fired up 10 seconds in, but I'm mad now. Which I think is the appropriate energy to bring to our next fight. Caitlin Chukagian versus Jessica Andrade in the flyweight division. Andrade, after a performance that proved nothing against Rose Namajunas, it certainly basically just validated whatever you came into the fight expecting it to validate. But nonetheless, what I think both of us considered probably one of the best performances of her career, if not the best, in terms of actual technical progression shown. She's now moving up to flyweight, which I don't know. I'm not 100% sure what the reason for that might be. I mean, it's probably a very difficult weight cut, but she has never seemed to visibly struggle with it before. Maybe she's just thinks she should try her luck in the weaker, crappier division. Maybe that's a good idea.
I think that's probably it. I mean, yeah, as you mentioned, she's never shown any add effects from being down at strawweight. I mean, maybe she has a weaker chin at strawweight.
Yeah, maybe.
Which allowed Namajunas and Zhang to hurt her when otherwise they wouldn't, which would make her one of the most insanely durable fighters I've ever seen.
If that's true, then she is an even greater physical specimen than we thought. It certainly hasn't affected her stamina, which has been legendary the entire time she's been at 115. Unbreakable conditioning. So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, probably just the fact that it's a weaker division, but I think that really, really makes sense for Andrade, to be honest. I think she could do very well at women's flyweight.
I mean, and this is one of the fights where I'm genuinely curious to see it. I mean, not necessarily this particular fight, but the thing I would actually like to see is I would like to see Jessica Andrade against Valentina Shevchenko.
Yep.
Because Andrade will, I think, absolutely pull maybe not like a back and forth fight out of Shevchenko, but certainly a meaningful one.
Mm-hmm.
Like she will not stop working and trying for an entire fight. So yeah, I mean, I would, there are not many fights in women's flyweight I would genuinely care about Andrade Shevchenko.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think this is a pretty reasonable way to probably rush her there. Like, I would imagine the matchmakers are thinking the same thing. At this point, this is just a division where, like, it's like Cyborg at featherweight. Like, you just bring people in specifically because they seem like, immediate compelling matchups for the champion. And yeah, that's what I want to see too. And I think this is a reasonable primer for that, to give us an idea of how she might do. I mean, Chukagian, definitely has different bearing and attitude to her sort of style framework than Shevchenko. But there are plenty of things in common. Both are frequently back foot fighters. Both, try to maintain the distance. Both are a little negative, potentially frustrating, and will require some amount of discipline to stick to a game plan that likely won't yield results immediately in the fight. Chukagian, way higher output, way more hittable, way less committed to the counter. All of these things are different, but it's a reasonable enough parallel to see how Andrade, might look in the Shevchenko fight. So I'm pretty happy about this one as well. Any thoughts on how this one plays out, where these two women are at right now? Chukagian's last fight was, that's right, the win over the lesser Shevchenko. And of course, Andrade had that very, very close rematch with Rose Namajunas. Any thoughts on the matchup?
The main thing has got to be Chukagian keep Andrade off her.
Yeah.
And from this perspective, she's obviously she's closer to Joanna Jędrzejczyk than Rose Namajunas. She doesn't have the stinging power, but she does have just the pace and the volume. Yep. It means that in some ways she has to walk more of a tightrope, but in others, she's less likely to hurt Andrade and more, but also less likely to be badly hurt by Andrade.
Yeah, I like that, actually. I think it's more of a redux of the Jędrzejczyk matchup than it is but we're working with what we've got here. Who else in the flyweight division is going to prepare you for Shevchenko more directly than that?
I mean, I'm not really. I don't think that there are any real analogs for Shevchenko in women's MMA at all at the moment. I think it's just want to see people who can push her in different ways.
I've compared her to Romero in the past, but that is our recent revelations about Yoel Romero also applies to his female counterpart. Really not transferable to other matchups. Anyway,
so I mean, I think analogs for the both of them in terms of who they fought, I think probably the closest is probably Chikagi and Maia, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that Andrade is probably better than Maia. I think specifically nowadays, because that Namajunas fight, I think it wasn't so much like a technical development from her end as it was like a game plan one. Because her defense was better in that fight, but only in a very specific, neutral kind of way.
It was really better because she used it. Like the fact that it was there was why it was better.
Yeah, and it's like you've always said. Can this person be defensive when they're attacking, or is it only a neutral space?
Mm-hmm.
And really, for Andrade, I think it really was only really a neutral space.
Mm-hmm.
She could stand there and evade shots when they were at punching range.
Yeah.
But if she came in and she tried to attack Namajunas, that was when she was getting hit.
Yeah. She's not in a place where defense is one of the many possible beats she could be slotting into an attack. Where it's like I could do jab, cross, left hook, or I could do jab, feint, cross, left hook, or I could do, jab, slip, roll, cross, left hook. Like the ability to have defense be just another moving piece in an offensive, in a layered piece of offense. She didn't have that. But she did counter off of it some. She did use it to initiate offense some, which is the first step.
That's what I think it was there for.
Mm-hmm.
It was there so that she didn't have to lead.
Yeah.
So that she could press into Andrade. So she could press into Namajunas, and when Namajunas struck at her, she was like, okay, I can avoid the first punch, or maybe, the first one or two strikes, but then I know we are in an exchange, and I don't have to win exchanges.
Yeah.
I know that I can kick her legs, I can go for attritional damage, and eventually I will start to have an effect.
I like the way
all that made sense.
Mm-hmm. I like the way you phrase that too. I've been thinking of that a lot recently, but just the basic premise that, with counterpunching, your defensive move, head movement in particular, is the jab. Or rather, it allows the opponent's jab to be used as your jab. It allows you to.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Turn there, instead of you having to put yourself out there and measure the distance and create the timing and establish the rhythm of the exchange or whatever, you just treat their jab as the tool which does that. And if you can evade their jab, either way, the exchange has been initiated. So yeah, I like that framing a lot. I think that's exactly why it was so effective.
So I think I think the Maia fight falls down a bit, I think, because even this new version of Andrade, Jessica does not sit at the same range that Maia does. She is always a foot closer, let's say. She's not trying to explode in over distance. She is definitely trying to create her own exchanges. Which means she's going to be she's going to be like leaping in a lot more. I think she probably work low kicks more. B, it means there's going to be more clinch situations, and that's where I'm really interested in this fight.
Yeah.
I think that really tells us how good Andrade is going to be as flyweight. Because she's not a great clinch fighter, has relied on physical strength, said this a bunch of times. And that was one of the areas where she didn't look like, it looked like Rose had trained that much more, and Andrade wasn't any better at all in the rematch.
She still, I mean, like I did, expected that the sheer physicality would be a big advantage in the tie-ups, which has bit her in plenty of previous matchups, but was an ace up her sleeve, obviously, against Namajunas the first time.
Yeah. So do you have strong reads on Chookagian's clinch game? Because mostly I just remember a lot of disengaging. I don't remember her being a really like active clinch fighter.
No, I think she's got an approach that could work though. Sort of like what we saw from Jędrzejczyk against Andrade. I think she's got sort of like a one and done. Deliver the shot and get out. She's like a lot of Mark Henry fighters in that she just sort of follows these like predetermined lines, these predetermined courses of action. And I think I see that's one of the triggers of hers that gets set off frequently is somebody collides with her, double collar tie, land the knee, disengage. So it's not very deep. But if her footwork is up to snuff, it could be all she needs to put the right tone on what clinch exchanges she does allow to happen. I still think the big battle is, like, if she's allowing the clinches to happen frequently, it's bad. In that case, this becomes a lot more like the Liz Carmouche matchup of Chookagian's, in which she just allowed this little physical tank to get inside, and Carmouche had absolutely no trouble whatsoever just picking her up and dumping her. And I think Chookagian's footwork, and she's gotten better in a lot of subtle ways. I think her takedown defense has gotten somewhat better, but also, like, it's not great. And Andrade does not need to even be as good a wrestler as she is, I think, to use her physicality in that range. So to me, the battle really is still determined at range. Can Chookagian keep Andrade off of her, and for how long? I do think that's may sound pretty obvious, but I still think that's the key question. And I don't know, man. I'm gonna say no. I don't think she can do it well enough. I don't think Chookagian is potent enough. I think she's even less offensively potent, arguably, than Joanna. Although, who knows? Maybe the weight class difference has concealed the room between them. But I think she's no more potent than Joanna. I think she's like just less good, less of an organic counter striker, more likely to put herself out of position while moving, and therefore being less, like more liable to get thrown into an Edson Barboza style, Benny Hill-esque running away backwards as fast as you can type of caper. I see momentum in this fight just sort of inevitably trending towards Andrade just because she never gets tired. Like we expected Paulo Costa to do, she does tend to respond to getting hit by just stupidly charging forward harder. And we have seen that proven and borne out in title fights. In fact, I think we've probably both said at various points in the show that the 5th round of her fight with Joanna Jędrzejczyk was probably her best.
Is still disgusting.
Insane, because she took an absolute ass whooping, was walking into shots for 20 minutes against someone who herself was not tired, was perfectly fresh. And yet she had enough energy and confidence, to just go for it. And I think that's a very rare thing. And I don't know. It was really all Carmouche needed. And that for me, that's the fight that I'm looking at that makes me think, if she lets Andrade connect with her, she's probably going to get...
That's a great one, because Carmouche is a fantastic analog for just physical strength.
Yep. Different approach.
Not much else. Mm-hmm. And I think if you blend that with the Maya fight, you probably have a reasonably good impression of how it looks. Yeah, Chookagian just doesn't But she doesn't have the technical acumen to play a Matador game, I think, for 3 rounds.
Yep.
She doesn't have the firepower to make it count. I think big moments are more likely to come Andrade's way.
Yep.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah, it puts those limitations put Chikage in a situation where, like a Barboza, like several of her teammates, she's going to have to, choose her moments to gamble, and like plant her feet and throw hard, which is something the kind of gambit she has genuinely gotten much better at making lately. It's been a huge improvement, in fact, is her ability to just set her feet. I think this is the one case where that's just not enough, because the moment you set your feet, like, you better hope you knock her dead in that moment, because otherwise you have stopped moving and she's still barreling forward. I just think it puts her in an uphill battle. All right, well, what do you say, Phil? Let's take one more break. When we come back, we're going to start recapping last weekend's card. Marlon Moraes, Corey Sandhagen, Edson Barboza, Makwan Amirkhani, an insane heavyweight slop fest between Marcin Tybura and Ben Rothwell, and, Joaquin Buckley. After this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
All right, welcome back, everyone, to Heavy Hands. We are done with Korean Zombie versus Brian Ortega. Fuck those guys. We're going to forget about it and never think of it again, because last weekend was too interesting for us to avoid talking about it any longer. As we said, not a great compelling card. Sometimes things work out, and the what looks bad on paper ends up being just a series of fascinating contests and results in the actual octagon. And that was the case. I mean, I don't know about you, Phil. This was but probably one of the better cards of the year in terms of just watchability from beginning to end.
Absolutely. I mean,
the pacing was a big part of that too, by the way. People noted that they moved from one fight to the next very quickly for the modern UFC era.
Yeah, and almost every fight kind of fulfilled what it could have been as the fight that we were watching.
Yeah.
Maybe not Barboza Amirkhani, but as we mentioned, it was sort of impossible for that fight to be genuinely boring anyway, and it wasn't. The fights which were going to be silly were silly and fun. The fights which were going to be good were good and fun. The fights which were going to be squash matches were over mercifully quickly.
Yep.
Everything was pretty much top to bottom. It was entertaining start to finish.
Yeah, and like we say, it had every flavor of everything you would like to experience. It had a uplifting win for Tom Breeze, who's been through so much difficulty for the last several years. That was a good feeling. Had like the announcement of possibly a new prospect in Ilia Topuria. Very impressive win over Yusuf Zalal, and a lovely touching moment between those gentlemen backstage. I don't know if you saw that, Phil, but
did not.
Very nice moment. Yusuf Zalal was backstage crying with his coaches. He was upset that the loss just hit him. Topuria came back. They had a nice embrace and talked to each other for a minute. It was a very sweet moment.
Very nice.
Yeah, it had a complete slop fest between Tybura and Rothwell, as well as the other kind of heavyweight fight. The other good kind of heavyweight fight with Tom Aspinall just instantly starching the Black Samurai, Alain Bodo. And it had the greatest knockout of all time. Joaquin Buckley deading Impa Kasanganay with an Olympic Taekwondo ass shit. Ultimate high risk, low reward move that paid off in the best way possible. It had everything. Fantastic night of fights. Let's quit generalizing and jump right into the main event. Corey Sandhagen, Marlon Moraes. Our feeling was basically that this would favor Sandhagen more and more as the fight went on. Honestly, I don't think it took very long for Sandhagen to wedge his way into this one. Not as long as I expected, actually. He pretty much was having fairly even exchanges with Moraes from the beginning. And at that point, it didn't even actually have to be that high a pace. Because he didn't, beat him by wearing him down. He actually hit him another insane, like Tekken style finisher move, on the same card. But anyway, what surprised you about the way this played out, given your expectations?
Yeah, just like the speed with which it was really apparent that Corey Sandhagen was going to win this fight.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Dan Tom at MMA Junkie who, I think in his breakdown I read, I don't know why I didn't fit either. He said the basic dynamics are not dissimilar to Aldo Holloway. It's like, oh yeah.
Yes, very similar in fact.
And
I have compared Marlon Moraes to Jose Aldo myself many times, and I think it's a comparison that continues to bear fruit.
Yeah, it was a great comparison. I was just watching it thinking, I think MMA has been like surprisingly kind to us recently. People often say that we complain about fight cards. Sure, it's fine. But
not us.
What with things like Holland being on a winning streak, Jan Blachowicz being the light heavyweight champion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this fight card was sort of a validation of some things we've been talking about and some stuff that we've been talking about with Danny Martin, which is that you really have to take the initiative.
Yes.
In high-level modern MMA, and by high level we generally mean lightweight and below, maybe welterweight and below as well, actually.
Wait a minute. You just said that with high level we mean small fighters. Yeah, you're pretty much right. I mean, I can't really argue. I think at all levels, honestly, in any combat sport, I think initiative is one of those wishy-washy, difficult to define concepts that is nonetheless absolutely essential to a fighter's success. I think initiative is, I don't know, it's one of those things that when you are thinking about it, it seems to explain everything that happens in a fight. Underscores everything.
But yeah, I think because having a defensive game plan is not going to work much more in MMA. I think, the Machida era did not last long. But was there, kind of. But that kind of thing is just not going to fly at the championship level of these higher weight classes. And we saw, Holloway Aldo should have been really the death knell. This was the greatest defensive fighter in mixed martial arts.
Yeah.
And his defense couldn't keep up. And Marlon Moraes' defense is not as good as Jose Aldo's. We saw this again in the co-main event. I don't know if you were listening to the commentary, but they were actually talking in the co-main about how Amikani specifically wanted Edson Barboza because he thought he had something for him. He thought he really could figure out how to get to him.
And what he thought he had for him was counterpunching, I believe.
Counterpunching? I mean, it was just like we mentioned, Amikani can start quickly, but he is basically defensive fighter who looks for singular moments.
Yeah.
And can't fight Edson Barboza like that.
No.
You can't fight Corey Sandhagen like that.
Yeah.
You can't just wait for singular moments to counter, because Sandhagen would basically kind of shuffle his way in, painting and tapping away with his lead hand, jumping backwards whenever he saw Moraes pick at him.
Mm-hmm.
And then once he was in touching distance, Moraes just had no idea what was coming back at him. And that was pretty much the beginning and end of the fight.
Yep. And as long as Moraes wasn't immediately countering, taking that attack we talked about with Brian Ortega earlier, as long as he was content to let Sandhagen show him more than just the first layer of an exchange, he was, from that moment forward, playing Sandhagen's game. He was allowing Sandhagen to lead him through those exchanges, to lead him by the nose. In other words, to seize the initiative.
Every box was getting ticked off there. I think the one where I was just like, this is this is over. But then I realized that Moraes was probably getting out-kicked as well.
Yeah, right. Took a page out of Gaethje's book.
That's his thing.
Mm-hmm. And he was landing really good ones early, yeah, but I think Sandhagen, like Gaethje against Barboza, he was like, well, I'm going to put my stamp on this phase as quickly as I can.
Yeah.
I'm going to immediately at least show that if you're going to kick me, I'm going to kick you back. I also have a weapon at this range in this phase. And yeah, very effective. I'm going to amend slightly, I think, your prediction for the future of so-called defensive styles in MMA. I think counterpunching in particular is just a very niche, even in boxing. Where its natural home in boxing, I think is a very niche way of fighting. It takes a supreme amount of confidence, which, the ability to muster confidence while essentially not doing anything, or while doing, what feels to a lot of people like not something proactive, to still be confident while letting your opponent take the lead, or at least letting them feel like they're taking the lead, which could be just as dangerous. It's a unique mindset and skill set that combines to make a really good counterpuncher. I do think there is a unique window in MMA, though, for outfighters. Because there's no fucking corners in the octagon. There's so much space to run around. And I think we will at some point see an innovation in that direction, where we're going to see more guys who are really specializing in their footwork and distance management. And the advantage of that, too, is that footwork is also a more is just a more proactive form of defense. You can be, while defending, you're also constantly like chasing an angle that makes your opponent uncomfortable. You can make them feel like they're being threatened by your evasion because you are, sneaking around to their side, and they have to account for that. They have to adjust to you. Therefore, you can still have the initiative while not attacking. It still puts you in a position where you kind of have to figure out what the other guy is going to do to you. But I think a more neutral position than just like what I'm trying to say is what really undid Moraes here is that he was standing in front of Sandhagen trying to guess what was coming. And that's just not
I think that's pretty much the style that we're going to see.
Yeah. It's not going to work.
You can't just go, okay, what are you going to show me?
Yeah.
I just don't think this has a future really in this sport.
Yeah. You'd have to develop more in the direction of Justin Gaethje's new counterpunching game. For a defensive style where it's a lot more proactive, but there's a lot more footwork and angulation involved in initiating exchanges. So, Sandhagen, obviously very good. I think Marlon Moraes is honestly still very good too. And people were talking about maybe did he decline? I think that was on people's brains because just before that we saw like a strong evidence that like Ben Rothwell has severely declined. I don't know. I think Moraes is the same guy. I just think it's a difficult style to make work, and Sandhagen is exactly the wrong guy to try to stand in front of and guess what's coming next.
Yeah, tend to agree.
Okay. Continuing down this card, I don't know, what else catches your eye before we start geeking out about the Joaquin Buckley KO again? Anything else you really want to talk about?
No, we don't have time for you to talk about how much you hate Ali Al-Qaisi.
Because he combines my hatred for Sam Alvey, a man I used to really like, but I've really soured on him, my hatred for Sam Alvey with your hatred for Josh Emmett into one.
And I kind of also hate Sam Alvey, so it's just...
Yeah. It just combines a sort of natural human reaction to these two other detestable men into one single detestable man, who nonetheless has a really funny style.
That's the thing. It was so adorable. I couldn't actually hit on it too much.
He only does one thing. He really tries. Yeah, it's kind of weird. It also sort of combines the this shouldn't be as successful as it is element of my hatred for Spike Carlisle. So he's really ticking all these awful boxes for me, Al-Qaisi, but I'm willing to give him a second chance. Should we just talk about Joaquin Buckley versus Impa Kasanganay here?
It's what everyone came for.
It's what everyone came for. First of all, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. You already saw it in the graphic, but that was a better Buckley. Kevin Holland is responsible for arguably the greatest KO in UFC history. He coached Buckley carefully, thoughtfully. He really put his heart and soul into crafting Joaquin Buckley into the best fighter he could be at this point in his career, and I think all of those results showed here. No, all joking aside, both of these guys have a lot of potential. I mean, we may be looking right here at evidence for the increasing okayification of the middleweight division.
Yes.
Right? We have these two up-and-comers and, like, Impa Kasanganay, very intelligent, thoughtful fighter, heavy hitter, sort of like an organic, flowy, counter-punchery type, still in development, but I think very promising. Those elements were why I was picking him here. But on the other hand, Joaquin Buckley, who is just like a kind of largely self-taught guy who just like has all of these sensible things bolted onto him, and combines that with like huge power, crazy durability, and, shall we say, Andrade-esque stamina, the ability to throw full tilt nonstop, but still manage himself well enough not to get tired doing it. Both physically and technically, I think both these guys are starting from a really strong place given how young and inexperienced they both are. And I thought, in addition to the KO, the whole fight leading up to it was sensationally good. It was a very entertaining contest.
Yeah, I mean, so a bit of context. I watched this after the next day, as I guess you probably did as well.
I caught the highlight on Reddit, and it blew my mind, and I watched it a dozen times immediately, but I did not catch the fight until the next day.
So when I was, I got up the next day, and one of the WhatsApp groups I was in saw a message popping up being like, I just said, "Is this the greatest KO in UFC history?" I was like, "Oh, not looking at that. Looking at this WhatsApp group until I've finished watching this event and seen what either Marlon Moraes or Edson Barboza have done."
The rare occasion where you actually do have to worry about having like a random prelim fight spoiled for you. Like, this shit went viral.
Yeah.
People outside the MMA world were excited about this.
I was like, okay, it could be Gichikadze, I guess.
Maybe.
I mean, it's probably going to be Barboza or Moraes, right?
Yeah, right.
It could have been Corey Sandhagen, but like, I was like, it was Joaquin Buckley, but yeah, the main thing leading up to that fight, leading up to the KO, I was just shocked at how, I mean, not necessarily sure, like, Kasanganay was already, I think he was already good.
Yeah.
I think he was fighting sort of as I was expecting him to. He was looking as good as I thought Kasanganay looks. Luckily, I thought was looking shockingly better. Like, considering the training situation and everything, don't know where all this stuff is coming from. He was doubling up on jabs. He was working the body.
Yeah.
Like, showing, like, the defense. He is, like, even before the knockout, I was just thinking, man, this guy is talented.
Yeah. That was my feeling when he first got signed. I was very excited for his fight with Kevin Holland because I was like, holy shit, this guy seems to hit really hard. He has baked into his style is a hair trigger combination counterpunching game. So even though he's not a counter puncher, those triggers are finely tuned and ready to go. Anytime you hit him or miss or do anything offensive, he's going to come back with several shots. So I thought he already had, like, obviously athletic potential and just a baseline thing that works for MMA, which is you hit me, I'm going to hit you back more. But I think this really demonstrated that, like, whatever his coaching situation is right now, he could be even better than that with just the simple addition of time to game plan. Because he didn't have that before Kevin Holland, and he still was remarkably well conditioned and still remarkably competitive with someone, crossing a vast experience gulf between him and his opponent. Here, with that distance shortened and enough time to actually prepare, he looked very sharp, very keyed in right from the beginning. I mean, the first exchange of the fight is Kasanganay, using that countering instinct against him. Like he jabs and then hooks off the jab, which is something he does really well. Another thing you don't see very often in this sport. Hooks off the jab and hits Buckley, and then Buckley just fires through it. Just surges after him with this blitzing combination. Same thing when he first hurt Kasanganay in the fight. Kasanganay threw a kick, and Buckley just fired off like 8 punches. Like the kick landed hard, and it didn't matter. Because that hair trigger of Buckley's is a really reliable part of his game. And I don't know, once you know the KO, you can watch the sequence in round 1 where Kasanganay catches a Buckley kick and holds on to it and pushes him back for like 4 seconds. It takes on a very prescient feeling, a very predictive moment in that fight. But a hell of a read for Buckley to actually pick up on that, to have drilled this move enough to be able to execute it, and then to pull it off. I mean, I don't know how predictive that particular thing is of how his game is going to work going forward in the middleweight division. Because that is a move where if it doesn't work perfectly, it kind of doesn't work at all. And the consequence of that could frequently be you putting yourself in a very bad position. Turning your back, jumping into the air while one foot is still sort of being controlled. High probability you're going to fall, end up in bottom position. You're going to give up your back. Maybe get countered like Marcus Perez did while trying to do a spin move on this card. A lot of risks associated with a move that 99.9% of the time is not going to instantly KO the opponent. But you can't help but be just immensely impressed because you're never going to, for those reasons, you're not going to see some shit like that in this sport. Basically ever. Almost ever.
I mean, and sort of as you alluded to before, like the middle of middleweight is really filling out in a way that I don't think it has before. Because I'm sort of famous for being someone who's gotten attached to middling middleweights before, but notably they weren't particularly good. Now, there's a bunch of genuinely, they're obviously quite flawed, but
they're still middleweights.
People who have higher ceilings than any of the guys I used to like watching back in the day.
Yeah.
Your Darren Stewarts and your Kevin Hollands and your Joaquin Buckley's and your Impa Kasanganay's are several physical steps above poor old Chris Camozzi.
Yes, poor Chris Camozzi and Sam Alvey seem like different species from that kind of middleweight.
And yeah, I mean, I'm curious to see what they do with a guy like Buckley next, because this is, the big moment.
They're gonna screw it up.
Lockdown UFC, really.
They're gonna screw it up.
I mean, I think the best thing they should do is they should give him the Sage Northcutt / what's his face? Evil dickhead guy, dead eyes, forgotten his name, shitty heavyweight.
Greg Hardy?
Greg Hardy, yeah, him.
Okay.
They should give Buckley the Greg Hardy treatment, really. Just give him a series of not particularly great, but okay sideways steps.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Probably going to be. And they can be like, Joaquin Buckley gets another incredible KO, and then they can show the first one again.
Yep.
What they're probably going to do is that they're going to rush him into a fight against Shoeface or something.
Yes, a fight where not only is it too much too soon, but he's going to, when he loses, it will be in a really uninspiring way. Yeah. Probably. I don't know. But man, yeah, middleweight kind of rocks in for the first time ever in an unironic way. It's actually very exciting. I have the same attachment to this weird division, and these are still weird guys, but they're far less limited than the middleweights at this level used to be, like you said. So very exciting. Of course, the real story here is still that I think we've uncovered a working theory that really makes sense, which is that any time Kevin Holland just out-savvies an opponent and beats them, he in fact molds them into greatness in the process. Even if he doesn't beat them, it's like after fighting Kevin Holland, just your whole perspective on life, on the world, and certainly on MMA is different. And I just want to remind people that not only did Joaquin Buckley, who, by the way, good student, because as they mentioned during this broadcast, and as you could see, Buckley likes to trash talk. He didn't trash talk at all versus Kevin Holland. He just listened, right? This is a guy with a penchant for talk who was wise enough to listen. And it yielded results. Thiago Santos' last middleweight fight, shit was against Kevin Holland. Kevin Holland was like, ow, that hurts. And stuff like that when Thiago Santos was hitting him. And that buoyed Thiago's confidence to the point that he is now the uncrowned light heavyweight champion. Joaquin Buckley does this after fighting Kevin Holland. Jeff Neal, of course, lost to Kevin Holland back in the day. Look where he's at right now. So Kevin Holland is the key to all of this. He really deserves at least half of the supposed $200,000 that Buckley was supposed to get. And Joaquin?
Really hope he got that money.
I don't know. All of that stuff makes me very upset to think about, to be honest, that it's like, oh, you have to do something like this, some once in a lifetime shit to get promised $200K, which is going to be gone in a 2 years at most. And yet I still have no confidence that he even got that. Cause what really mattered to Dana White was, oh shit, all this is being talked about. I need someone to record a video right now of me telling Joaquin Buckley that he's going to be rewarded. That's what really matters.
Yeah.
And they jumped on that as quick as they could. So the fact that they were so quick for the PR response does not engender confidence that the actual response is going to, the material consequence Buckley deserves is going to happen. I don't know. I'm a pessimist.
The old tough 6-figure contract, which
That's
will be
right.
paid out to you over a course of 2 years.
That's right. I'm going to give you $200,000 in $1 per annum installments. Yeah, it's probably something like that. But an incredible moment that served as the sort of unexpected centerpiece of what was an unexpectedly incredible card. So, good shit. Before we wrap up today's episode, anything to plug, Phil?
Nothing myself. I will still be still working on something which will probably be coming out at some point. It might be obliquely about it's actually my, but more I think it's going to be just a continuation of my pieces of my work that I did when I was talking about Sage Northcutt and how the UFC sort of business model works with respect to its fighters.
I love your writing
on that.
I always enjoy your writing on prospect development. I think it's a topic you have a good perspective on. So,
other than that, what I've been reading, I read Sriram's breakdown, I think, of Corey Sandhagen's performance in context of his other fights, which I thought was very good.
Okay,
go check that out. And that's pretty much it for me at the moment.
Cool. Well, I'm going to make the mistake of mentioning something that's not complete yet, or even really started, because I think it's probably going to happen. Shut up, Phil. Shut up. Don't jinx this. This guy, you've heard of this guy, Vasyl Lomachenko?
Oh, is he one of these Dagestani wrestlers?
Yeah. Actually, he almost is. He is actually kind of a wrestler. Anyway, Lomachenko's fight is, of course, that much anticipated fight with Teofimo Lopez. I don't know 100% how competitive that's going to be, but Lomachenko's one of these fighters where you just have to periodically get excited about, like, is this guy going to have the secret to solving him? Lopez himself, very exciting and clever fighter. So if it's not this week, then early next week, probably around the time, if not slightly before you hear next week's Heavy Hands episode, I'm planning on writing something about that fight. So just go to bloodyelbow.com.
You heard him,
yep.
Listeners. If it's not out, start abusing him.
If it's not out, I want you to send your complaints to what's the new handle for Kyle?
It's Manga Mush, I believe.
Yes, Manga Mush. I want you to send all your complaints to my Twitter account, Manga Mush. You can find Phil on Twitter at Evil Greg Jackson, and me, I just want to spell it out for you just one more time, at MANGAMUSH. That is me, and I really want you to yell at me. And otherwise, thank you all so much for listening to this week's episode of Heavy Hands. If we did manage to carve some bonus material out of the middle of that episode, which I think we probably did, you can find that over on our Patreon, where you can also find a heavy bag episode from the end of last month, in addition to a little breakdown and recent celebration of, I think it was Ricardo Lamas. Maybe there was another one as well. But check out the Heavy Hands Patreon. It's just $3 a month to get access to all of our bonus episodes, and we really do appreciate your support. Until next week, which, holy shit, it's almost here, Phil. It's Gaethje Khabib, right?
Is it really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. October 24th. So we're very excited to coming back to talk to you next week. We hope all of you guys are getting excited already too. Probably going to dedicate a lot of time just to the upcoming fights in that card. But until then, thank you all so much for listening. And if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.